Welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon's live panel discussion, which forms part of the Data Centers Ireland Virtual Festival. My name is Hugh Robinson and I'm the Exhibition Director for Data Centers Ireland, which unfortunately cannot be held this year due to the pandemic, but will take place on the 16th and 17th of November 2021 at the RDS. Data Centers Ireland Virtual Festival consists of live panel discussions, 2 per day over the course of the week, featuring industry leaders and experts discussing key areas affecting data centers, both in Ireland and internationally. As well as live panel discussions, the festival also has a range of on-demand content which can be accessed through the Data Centers Ireland website. This afternoon's webinar discusses the issues related to data and the positive role that data technology has in climate action, and is organised in association with Hosting Ireland. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their support. If you would like to put any questions to the panel, please put them in the chat box on the left-hand side, and they should be addressed either at the end of the session or when they notice them and get round to them. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to Data Centers Ireland website as additional on-demand content. The moderator for this afternoon's panel discussion is Michelle Wallace, Head of Operations and Community at Hosting Ireland. So without further ado from me, let me hand over to Michelle. Michelle.
Thank you, Hugh. So today, welcome everybody. We're just going to talk about, and it's a topic that fascinates me as technology changes, as our life changes, as we're looking at the growth in the technology sector. What is the role of technology in climate change, and what is the effect? Is it positive? Is it negative? Today, we've got around 15% of global emissions apparently will be reduced by digital technology. And we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail and around different technologies, how our lives are changing, what the impact of data is, what the impact of technology is on that. So to help me, and the people who actually know what they're talking about, we have Mark Garner, the Vice President of Secure Power Division for Schneider. We've got Gary Connolly, President and Founder of Hosting Ireland. I've got Maurice Mortel, who is the Managing Director for Ireland for Equinix. And I've got Joan Mulvihill, Digitalisation. That's a difficult word to say, so we're going to have to work on that. Digitalisation lead.
I thought you were going to say Mulvihill was the hard part to say.
Oh no! Well, I probably just said that wrong. Anyway, for Siemens Ireland. So welcome all of you, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
First off, I'd like to just look at, to you, what is digital transformation? What does it mean to you and your company? And if I could open that up, please, to start with Joan. I will go round to everybody, but Joan, if you'd like to kick off there. So what is digital transformation to you and your company? What does it mean?
Okay, well, I think one of the very most significant differentiators I would always say is it's transformation through digital rather than transformation to digital. Digital is not the end in itself. It is the enabler. It is the tool that we use, the vehicle that we use, the medium to get us to a better outcome. And it's the transformation part that's really important. So in the context of what we're talking about here, we want to transform our businesses, our lives, our planet to be more sustainable. And we will do that through digital transformation, through the technology, but not with the technology as the end in itself.
Thank you, Joan. Mark.
Yeah, I couldn't echo Joan's points enough, really. That digital transformation is really around how we use the technologies around us. So, it's how we work today, how we learn, how we communicate, how we shop. One of my favourite phrases at the moment is digital disruptors. I love the changes that's happening within our world at the moment. So if you take the retail industry as an example, you see magic mirrors and things like this starting to pop up. Shops that are completely unstaffed and you can go in and out and without having to transact directly. These are things that are really changing the way we live and engage our day-to-days, our lives, the people and around us, and that for me is digital transformation. It's the what you get from it, not the how you do it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Mark. And to your point as well, Joan. It's not about, there's the positive role in data transformation and how we use energy and how that data is consumed. And then there's also that societal change, which is a whole other conversation entirely, and the pluses and negatives of that. Thank you for that, Mark. And Maurice, what about you?
Yeah, so we obviously talk to a lot of businesses about digital transformation and digitization. It's sometimes it's hard to articulate this in sort of layman's terms, but the way I see it at the moment certainly is it's taking friction out of the supply chain, both internally and externally, sort of bringing agility to how you do business with your customers and how you support your staff. Equinix's growth, over the last 4 or 5 years has been built on the back of the digitization of its 10,000 plus customers. And it's driven this massive global footprint to be able to support customers' desire to go global without necessarily having to staff it, and desire to get access to digital infrastructure without necessarily having to buy it. That's very empowering for business to be able to do that. And I think if we take into context the current pandemic, we've seen a significant acceleration in digitization. And I suppose the challenge that now gives the industry and those that work around it and in it and support it is, how do we do that in a sustainable way?
Thanks, Maurice. And Gary, how about you?
When I think of digital transformation, transformation is the interesting word, because we've always had transformation going back to probably the caveman, but more to put a hook on it, probably the Industrial Revolution that was driven by steam in the 1700s was transformation or revolution. We're now on the fourth one. So really all it is that if steam was the enabler for the first industrial revolution, data is the enabler for this industrial revolution. The difference being, however, is that probably the word industrial is wrong, because it's societal transformation, which is using tools that aren't as physical as steam or a steam engine. They're data. And that's the bit that, to Maurice's point, it's often very difficult to actually differentiate for people and for myself a tool that you can't see, a digital tool driven by data. And effectively, that's all they are, to Joan's point. They are tools that we have at our disposal. But, as my father used to say, a great set of wrenches and hammers for a shit mechanic is still a shit mechanic. So we have to be very careful that we don't believe that these tools are actually making the outcome any better if we don't train the people to know why they're doing it. And that's one of the things that I'm most interested in about this new wave of consciousness and awareness of unintended consequences associated with what we do with data, with the centres and all that type of stuff.
Michelle?
Yes, Joan?
At the risk of, derailing your questions, can I just add something?
Oh, Maurice, go on then.
Well, Maurice used the term, about how the technology now is allowing people to access or build their business without having to acquire the infrastructure. That they can effectively lease it. And that's the great thing about it. It's so much more democratic now in terms of access. And that feeds so much to what Gary has just said around the word industrial revolution. So the industrial revolution basically required you to have a lot of capital to be able to access and be part of that journey. And I think one of the things that this is doing now is a democratization of that. And so when we say the word industrial revolution, it doesn't sound so threatening as saying a societal revolution, because that does kind of sound like a revolution. But I think that's one of the things that is happening now. There is the people's ability to participate in this and their access to it by virtue of digital has changed everything in a way that, you know, before it was very much a top-down revolution, and this is this particularly in the context of sustainability and how we talk about that, this can come from the bottom up as well. And I think that's what's really interesting.
And that's a great point, Joan. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I've heard democratization of digital and technology so many times, and I've never heard it explained so well. So thank you for that.
Can you spell it though?
Yes. Do you want me to?
That's next week's webinar. The spelling bee. And Maris, what about you? So you know, when you hear Gary talking about that and how data is part of this new industrial revolution, you're part of the centers that are interconnecting, that are storing, that are processing, and then also you've got this new role around this sustainability. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the growth in data, you know, we all see the figures. You know, it's exponential. I made this reference point before on a couple of these webinars. Our global interconnection index that we bring out every year, I think we're in volume 4 now, is showing growth of 5 times per annum between 2019 and 2023 in the volume of data, and that's just data.
Is that, sorry, Maris, just to clarify, so are you saying there's 5 times the data that we are all using, that businesses and individuals are using?
Yeah, it's growing. Yeah, it's going to grow 5 times over the next 4 years. And that data, that point is taken from the private data that's exchanged within the data centers over interconnection. So this is not public internet stuff. This is stuff that's going on site to site. Country to country, region to region, globally, whatever way you want to connect it. So that's the speed of the growth. So, you know, and then we've also got another challenge around the digital edge, which is also getting, you know, closer proximity to our devices in order to get speed of access to data, so data can get back and be computed and analyzed in a more efficient way. So that's driving more data. So I think we've all accepted the fact that data now is going to grow, you know, exponentially. And how do we go about managing that growth in a environmentally sustainably friendly way? And you know, that brings a very big challenge to our industry. And I'll speak in terms of Equinix, but I mean the industry in general terms, it's a challenge. You know, the technology-related energy growth we know is global, and that isn't, just Ireland related. And I think, broadly speaking, that all our stakeholders kind of get the sustainability, agenda, and that it's important that there's got to be a plan in place to what does this look like in the future. If this is the growth that we're going to see, and this is the requirements that the industry is going to have, both for customers and for employees and for communities and shareholders, all the stakeholders that are involved in our businesses. How do we go about doing that, and what are the plans that we set in place? So with that, at the start of this year, I took on a kind of a wider remit in EMEA to take a sustainability lead for Equinix. So whilst we've been doing quite a lot over in the US, and we really just started to build up our capabilities in EMEA. So that whole area that covers the whole ESG portfolio. So it's environmental, it's social, it's governance. So under the environmental umbrella, it's energy consumption, renewable energy, carbon footprint, And under the social, it's more around diversity, inclusion, belonging, creating meaningful opportunities for our employees, inclusive culture, global benefits. And then under the governance side, it's kind of ethics and compliance, public policy, and GDPR. I'm not going to be doing all of that.
Quite your remit, yeah.
I'm going to concentrate pretty much on the E of that for now, which is going to be on the environmental side, which kind of will cover our existing footprint and our new data center builds across the region.
Great, thank you. And Joan, when we talk about digital transformation and climate action, climate change, is digital transformation, in your view, a help or a hindrance?
It has to be, as an enabler, it has to be seen as a help. I think it's a lot of it is narrative in terms of how you start the conversation with your customer and focusing what it is they want to achieve. So when I talk about digital transformation, I actually generally don't talk about digital transformation, to be honest with you. If I could lose the digitalization tag in my job role, then I'd just be lead. I don't think that's very meaningful either, but I think you're just leading people on a journey, and it depends on where they want to get to. But wherever they want to go to, digitalization is going to be the vehicle to get them there. Mm-hmm. So when I say it's a help, it has to be, we talk a lot about sustainability. So if I was to take our manufacturing, our industry customers, rather than just, the infrastructural side, I think people get, but manufacturing, we talk a lot about, businesses are focused on, yes, sustainability for environmental reasons, for all of that, but also the sustainability, the financial sustainability of their business and their profitability. And I think that's really important. That is achieved through digitalization too. So, and that has also environmental impacts and opportunities, because one of the best ways a manufacturer can, improve profitability is get rid of waste. And, reduce shrinkage, reduce waste in the production cycle, reduce wasted raw materials, reduce wasted energy, making everything more efficient. And all of that is done through digitalization. So again, when I talk about sustainability with our customers, it is in the context of this is a really bad rattling noise in the background. I don't know where that's coming from. It's about what it is what are their goals, what it is that they're trying to achieve, what's their long-term strategy, what's the sustainability of their business, 5-10 years from now. A lot of businesses are looking at industries, and I love what Mark just said about digital disruption, and you're so right. I just think businesses have a choice right now. You're either going to be the disruptor or you're going to be disrupted. If you're going to be disrupted, you better make sure that you are at least match fit to compete in that disrupted world. So one way or the other, digitalization is going to get you there. If you want to be the disruptor, the challenge, I think the opportunity through technology is to reimagine your business, your marketplace 10 years from now. And that takes really big thinking, creativity. That takes all the rules, everything that all the conventions that you accept about your industry right now are gone. So what are the big things happening? The political, the environmental, the societal, the technology, the legal, the environmental, the stuff that we all talked about for years. What's going on that's going to change your market 10 years from now? And what is your role going to be in that new market? You're either going to be leading it, shaping it, or you're going to be following and competing, or you will be dead.
I think nearly this year has shown us that it's not even 10 years anymore, because look at the transformation in the kind of second quarter of the year was 3 years in itself.
Exactly. And it's proven that it is doable. The stuff that we thought we couldn't do or that we wouldn't do, well, we've now shown that we can. We've shown that technology was actually the solution to most of that. Whether that's anything as straightforward as just actually selling online or us doing our conferences and all of that online. Technology is the answer. It is the possibility, the enabler for the creating of the disruption. But fundamentally, it takes the guts to imagine that future and say, right, okay, where's the crazy idea? Where are we going? And if you're not going to be that person, that disruptor, how do you get yourself match fit to compete?
I often, sorry, Michelle, I just wanted to add that I often refer to it as ambition. You know, we've got to be ambitious. We've got to be strategic in terms of how we keep moving in this direction. But the ambitions are clear. If we're not pushing boundaries, then we're never gonna move the needle. Keep moving the expectations of our customers, of our investors, of the people that we engage with. It's a critical part of it, and we've got to keep challenging ourselves.
And I think to Mark's point, sorry, Michelle.
No, go ahead.
I think to Mark's point, I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'm sure Mark, you experience this, and Mara certainly too, you know, we deal with a lot of, maybe Mara's a little bit less, a lot of very big established companies. And it is harder for them because they are sometimes, for all the resources that they've got, they're actually hampered by the constraints that years of that can actually bring about. Whereas dynamic little nimble startups who are able to plug and play straight into that technology, okay, they have to get funding, but they're not sitting there waiting or wading through the permission layers to make that happen. They're courageously having a vision, fearlessly putting it out there and going, we're just going to go and do it. And they don't have to risk their existing business or manage and balance all of those conflicting priorities. So in some ways, the startups are advantaged in that regard. And it's not to underestimate the challenge. And as Mark said, the imagination and leadership that is required in existing businesses to make those leaps.
Yeah, I think you're right, John. I mean, if you look at the, I suppose, the financial services, in particular the traditional banks, and how they've been disrupted over the last number of years, and for some of those to react and drive transformational change, which is slightly different to just change, does take time. But I also feel from the conversations that we've been having, you know, they all recognise the need and the speed at which they need to digitize, and the sooner the better. And because I mean that, you know, any of the Revolut, you can take any of the guys that have started off in the last couple of years who have, you know, been able to get up so agile and to get their businesses up and running with very different running costs, very different overheads, very different probably culture, and are able to get into a niche and build their platform and their business very, very quickly.
But Morris, it probably also goes back to what I said earlier about what stage we're at. The World Economic Forum have recognized that, as I say, we're in the fourth industrial revolution, driven by data. But recently they changed that. It's not driven by data. It's driven by the intelligence from the data.
Yeah.
Because the startups that Joan is talking about aren't swamped with data. They're lean, but they've intelligent data. And it's much the same as Joan and I were on a panel recently, and we were asked about for graduates. Remember that, Joan? Remember we were asked about, and it was called wisdom. You can have as much intelligence and education as you possibly want, but it actually doesn't have the same currency anymore. Yeah. It's Google.
The wisdom line was the David Attenborough line. He said that we didn't need. What we needed was more wisdom. We didn't need more data or more information. We needed greater wisdom.
So that's exactly the same now in where we are right now. And it sort of encapsulates a lot of what Mark, Joan, and Morris have said, is I can start a business now with 2 iPhones, one here and one with my mate in Namibia. And we have access to a supercomputer with no capital. Yeah, it's just extraordinary. Yeah. Whereas even in my generation, which is only 70 years ago, I'd have to go and get capital to buy a mainframe, to be educated. And you know, that. So then if all things are level, then it's not the data or the tools that we've discussed. It's the intelligence to know who to ask. If I was to do this, would you buy it? And it's just a wonderful thing. And it's, when I listen to Mark and I listen to Joan and their pitches, they use the word all the time, smart. Yeah? What's smart? What is smart? It's just data that is being granulated down to get rid of the FUD and send an intelligent instruction to something, more than likely not to do something rather than to do something. And that is where we're moving into the area where data is a positive for climate, which is what the purpose of this is. It's the intelligence from the data, not the data itself. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the things on the back of that, though, Gary, that this is where we start to go into this broader conversation around artificial intelligence, because you take the decision making away from the human element and you start to make it more automated based on triggers and the such like that. So one of the things that we see a huge amount of this is this integration between information technology and operational technology. So how do we as people interact with the office buildings that we work in? And something as simple as, it's been around for years, but lighting systems and when a light comes on and goes off, the sustainability impact on the back of that starts to drive a significant change in terms of, one, the output of the building that you work, live, operate in, whatever it may be. But then there's a data piece as well that starts to be channeled in a different way and used in a different way, and it's collated, and we can take a look at it retrospectively, as the case may be. But artificial intelligence is one of the key factors that's really going to start to progress sustainability in this convergence between IT and OT.
Can I just add to something that Marcus has said there, and maybe back to what Morris was saying when he gave the banks as an example? I think what Revolut did in the context of insight or intelligence or wisdom, what they did do very well is they read what it was the customer needed. And I think Mark referenced this at the start around this making things more frictionless for customers, in terms of their experience and how they experience services. And Revolut have done that really well. And I think where the banks got caught up on is our expectations of banks were lower. And what they did was they digitized existing processes. So they took something that already existed and they made it digital, rather than actually throwing out that preconceived rule book or convention, and said, well, what is it people actually want to be able to do? How do people behave in the real world? Well, what they do is they go to dinner and someone is sitting there with a calculator and they're divvying it all up and they're going, oh, I'll get this, or you get me the next time. And going, just Revolut. They understood how the customer behaved and what value proposition they were trying to serve. And they used technology, the data, they used the technology to be able to execute it. They use the data to be able to get that insight and that understanding of behaviors. But when we want to put that in the context now of sustainability, and we talk about consumers' behaviors and what consumers really, really want, Morris quoted the rate of growth of data. Well, I heard a great growth rate the other day, a couple of weeks ago, in a conversation with a food producer that said food product that is marketed sustainably, marketed on its sustainability, was growing 5 times faster, 6 times faster than non-sustainably produced food, marketed food. So that makes me think that the consumer wants sustainability in what it's consuming. It wants it in its food, it wants it in its traffic system, it wants it in its mobility, it wants it in its hospitality. The consumer wants sustainability. And that ties back to what we said at the very, very start about this societal revolution through technology. People have access to so much more data now. We're intelligent, we're smart, we're consuming all of it, and we know that it's possible. So we're being more demanding of the people who provide products and services to us by saying, we know you can do it. Now do it. And there you have your business case, because so many companies are going, well, where's the return? So when Mark talks about smart buildings and we talk about how we experience them, think about who invests in the smart buildings, in buildings, property investors. They invest, whether they're pension funds, whatever, and their job is to get a return on that investment. So what we have to do is prove that the yields, that the return on a smart building is greater than the return on a non-smart building. And that return might be because the total cost of running it is lower, but it might also be because the people who are going to rent it from them will pay a premium, will pay more because they want to be in a sustainable building, because that reflects on their own sustainable brands if it's a commercial entity, or it might reflect on their personal ones if it's a private rental residential property. But whatever it is, the market is driving this. Yeah. And I think that's really, really important, understanding customers' needs.
Yeah. And the other, I suppose, add on to that, we've just finished a body of work with Gartner on the sustainability of data centers and data centers of the future. But some of the stats coming out of that are quite compelling to me. But 90% of organizations want now to do business with partners who share their sustainability goals. 85 or another high 80% of those organizations are including those DC stat feed and sustainability in their own sustainability reporting. And so I think we all agree that the old enterprise data center is a thing of the past, and we're not going to see that anymore. So that is driving that stakeholder community is driving the industry to act in a certain way. And that's all those people I mentioned. It's shareholders, it's customers, it's employees, it's the communities in which we work in, are all pushing us towards this, and rightly so, by the way, this whole sustainable approach towards our business and how we deliver our service.
It's we've done a similar research. Schneider commissioned one with 451 Research, and one of the outputs that we got from it was 800 multi-tenant data centers over 20 different countries that we contacted, and 97% of them said that their customers were asking them for contractual sustainable actions on the back of the contracts that they're signing. So yeah. It's a huge factor. We're seeing this big shift, but there's these soft measures as well. And Joe mentioned brand and our own brands and our business brands. And Gary was talking about graduates before. That I think when you start to think about recruitment and who we're going to attract to our businesses and to our industry in the future, sustainability is one of the key decision makers now that we see. One of the things that when we go and do our graduate programs in Schneider Electric, it's fascinating how many of them come and talk to us because of sustainability rather than who we are as an organization to start off with.
And of course that becomes beautifully self-fulfilling then, because you bring in the sustainability focused graduates and you get more and more sustainable all the time by having them.
Morris and I had a great chat. I don't know if it was on a panel recently, and we were talking about in the 80s when we came out, you were happy enough to get a bit of work,
Oh, yeah.
You didn't know any better, and you took what you got. Now with what we've just been talking about with let's call it the internet, the graduates are interviewing you. Mm-hmm. And they're starting now. Michelle put into my narrative and my language a word a couple of years ago that I use all the time now, purpose. This purpose thing is very real, and it's very embedded into what they're about. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's all about sort of a self-fulfilling. I have an 11-year-old here inside, and she asked me recently what my view was on unconscious bias. About algorithms. So I think we're dealing with a different creature here.
I thought you were saying you have an 11-year-old in your head then, Gary.
No, he hasn't grown up yet. He's only 4.
I was thinking.
But Joan, do you not think, as you're talking there, and you opened up earlier about sort of disrupt or be disrupted, look, that's always been the way. Netflix was pitched to Blockbuster, and they passed up on it, right? But the difference right now is because of all that we've said, the speed by which 2 dudes with 2 iPhones can disrupt your business without those barriers is just gone. It's gone. Is that called democratization?
In a way. I do think it is changing very fast. And Michelle made the point absolutely that what we've gone through this year has been a bit of a time warp speed in terms of showing what's possible. And so I think some of the barriers we faced to change are falling a little bit because that excuse is no longer going to hold. And I think some people held on to it as a way of stemming the tide until they could catch up. And I just think it's just fallen away now. There just isn't time for that. And I think, again, to bring this back to the sustainability piece, and Greta Thunberg said, act like your house is on fire. Well, actually, a global pandemic pretty much put the house on fire and showed what was possible when your platform was burning. And we have to acknowledge now that the sustainability, the clock is still ticking. It's now actually ticking loud enough that pretty much everybody has heard it at this point. And now the reasons not to do it or the excuses not to do it are gone. So the only thing that's left is ourselves and our choices.
And on that, and this question probably goes to all of you, are we making enough of a step change as an industry, as a society? And yeah, we've had, big escalation in terms of the digitization in the last 8-9 months for sure. Are we doing enough as an industry? We're being driven by the employee base, we're being driven by the shareholders. Now it's part of the conversation, it's part of the shareholder conversation, it's part of the consumer conversation. But are we doing enough? Are we moving fast enough? Are we making the step changes required to make a difference over the long term?
Will I answer that?
I missed it completely, so.
Okay, so I mean, the immediate answer in my head is yes, and let me just explain that. So, Equinix has a sustainability report we bring out every year, and we state in that we'll be 100% clean tech and renewable across our global footprint. Now, I said earlier on what that global footprint is, which is it's 210 data centers in 28 countries, 56 metros, and 5 continents. That's a lot of infrastructure that we have to green and effectively get it down to a carbon neutral footprint. So there's a number of things that have to be done to enable that to happen. So first of all, we all accept that has to be done, and that's the case. And then so how do we go about doing it? So we need to start. We need to start building greener, cleaner, and smarter facilities for the new ones. We've got to, support better power densities. We look at our, we spoke about AI and optimizing the data center environments, and liquid cooling and fuel cells and all the technology that's out there at the moment, and bringing that into best practice in building the facilities of the future so that they are as green as they can be. We talked about renewable energy, renewable energy projects, purchase power agreements, where we're supporting the renewable energy industry so that more renewable energy comes onto the grid. I think it was Joan mentioned circular economy, waste heat. How does that get put back in for better usage in the communities that we operate in? Water usage efficiency and waste materials, I think was the other one. So I think everyone's got it, and they know the things that have to be done, and they know we also know the things that we have to do in our legacy infrastructure, which takes a little bit longer because some of those sites are a lot older. But things are happening at different speeds in different countries based on local, regional, country regulations and expectations. So it's going to take us a period of time to get to where I think everyone states they want to be. I am certainly very encouraged by what's happening locally, just in general terms. I think we can probably do a little bit more on the climate action plan. And then I'm very encouraged what's happening in Europe, because I'm doing some policy work, and the European Union have stepped forward and said, okay, look guys, we want you guys to be carbon neutral, your industry, by 2030, I think it is, and the whole region to be carbon neutral by 2050. And they also 100% accept the fact that if they want to have a digital Europe, the data center industry is going to play a critical part in the delivery of a digital Europe. So they want to work with the industry to get to the end point, and also they're prepared to invest in that. So, you know, I think there's huge ownership and there's huge leadership required, and I think it's there. I think there are going to be time lags depending on what, you know, where you are in that sort of roadmap, depending on the country or the region you're in. But it's a concerted effort by a number of entities. It isn't just our industry, it's the industry, it's the utility companies, it's the distribution grid companies, it's governments, it's state agencies, it's the supply chain into the industry. So everyone's got to step up and take their part of responsibility to get to the point where we need to get to.
Great, thanks, Mars. Mark, have you anything to add to that from your perspective? You know, your company motto is life.
Yeah, Michelle, I don't know. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Good. I'd echo what Maurice was saying there, that the industry as a whole is doing a lot. Have I lost you all?
No.
Sorry.
Yeah.
My screen just went blank for a moment. Yeah, so the industry as a whole is doing a huge amount to focused around sustainability, but you know, my nature is always to want more, and I think there's always more that we can do. If I take Schneider Electric as an organisation, in September last year, we accelerated our sustainability commitments, and around 4 main areas. So carbon neutrality by 2025. Brought forward 5 years from 2030. We've committed to no SF6 gases in our equipment by 2025. Net zero operational emissions by 2030. And then the big one is really around a net zero supply chain, and the extension of that is to 2050. Yeah. And that for me is one of the real challenges that we've got to look at as an industry, because ultimately there's so many facets to the supply chain, where we buy our equipment from, and subsequently what we do with it, how we transport it to Morris and Morris's facilities. The embedded carbon footprint that sits within all those products is a huge challenge for us when we start to talk about sustainability. And that's where it's incumbent on organisations like Siemens, like Equinix, like Schneider Electric, to really start to challenge the industry as a whole, to say, if you want to be in our supply chain, if you want to supply us equipment, you've got to change your practices, your behaviours, how you work, and demonstrate to us that you'll be carbon zero by X amount. And hopefully that then pushes and I'll go back to this ambition word, changes their ambitions to accelerate faster as well. So there's more certainly we can do. I think technology and the systems are all there, but there's a challenge internally in all of our business to say, where can we accelerate? And then when we look at our broader supply chain and systems, how can we accelerate within those two? Yeah.
And I think, you know, as much as you talked about employees and new employees coming in and wanting to work for sustainable companies, and your shareholders, you know, forcing, a more sustainable conversation, you as major procurers of multiple services and multiple products have the purchasing power to influence a huge supply chain. And the amazing and powerful thing about that is you're not just supplying, it's not just influencing your supply chain, you're actually influencing producers that are going to be supplying lots and lots of other people who don't have your purchasing power. So that's to Mars's point, that's your responsibility, not just you, but companies like you, large companies like you.
I think just to Michelle's point there about large companies versus smaller ones, and Mars mentioned it when he talked about the everybodyness of it, like every single person in supply chain and all of the stakeholders are involved, and investors and governments and policies and companies. The time for the whataboutery, I think, is over, and I think that's been also a defense that companies have used in the past, or countries have used in the past, well, there's no point me doing it because what about so-and-so, and they're much bigger, and if they don't, then what I do won't matter. I mean, I still want a Blue Peter badge or a letter from David Attenborough every time I send out a full recycling bin, and I'm going, go me, look at me washing all my dirty plastics before I put them in the recycling bin, and all my cardboard is shiny and clean and lovely. You know, like, everybody has to do their bit, whether a large organization or small. And I see it in terms of what, you know, Roland Bush came out with just a couple of weeks ago, like our incoming CEO. And it's a big deal, your first message to all of your people. And the line was, we will help our customers to achieve more using less natural resources. He didn't need to put that in, but that is the message that's gone out to everybody. Our job is to help our customers achieve their goals, to achieve more with using less natural resources. And so that's all of our customers, it's all of ourselves. The scope 3 in the supply chain, I think everybody's got a good handle on scope 1 or 2, our immediate raw materials, our immediate providers, but it's when you get beyond our own activities, but when you get really up the supply chain, it does get complex. And I think that's, again, where technology has a role to play, where we can use the track and traceability, the blockchain, where we can use technology to really help us measure that and authenticate it. And that will be important, because all of this has to be based on truth and fact, and indisputable fact. And what is traceable? There will be no get-arounds, there will be no breaches. So we can use the technology to help us with that as well. And you know obviously we're here at the guest of Gary, and I think the role of the data centers is so important in all of that, because obviously it will all be driven by the data, and they will be the big enabler. The people who hold and manage that infrastructure, the new utility, they will be the big enabler of that. And people are looking at them and they're saying the whataboutery question. When one of your biggest operating costs is energy, you are committed to making sure that it is not only low cost and sustainable energy, but that is a reliable, consistent source of energy. And renewable energy is the one energy that is in fact renewable and not going to run out. So they are completely invested in this. So can we just end that nonsense conversation to a certain extent as an excuse on the whataboutery?
Well, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in the world right now, Joan, and you know that, and it has been fueled over the last 4 years by fake news after fake news. So people don't know what to believe or where they can go to their source of credible information. So I don't think we're there yet, where we do the right things in the right order with the right people for the right reason. We have to keep doing that. But I think what's most important, what we are ready to discuss, in my opinion, is that data centers are going nowhere. In fact, they're going everywhere. Okay, that's the first thing. The second, very important, and if I had one desire of any of the people listening to this today, is to remember that this asset class called a data center is there for a reason. To keep the rain off data. Okay? That's why it's called a data center. And the data then is used to decarbonize cities, to decarbonize and to be used on thermostats in your home, smart thermostats in your home. And that data in itself is actually the real decarbonizing agent, not the center.
No, I get that, Gary, and I think that's the part. But where the whataboutery comes in is, and this is the fake news part, is that we need to end the conversation that says, well, yes, the data will help me reduce. If the cost of storing the data and executing the data and the data transactions of having that infrastructure there is greater than what I'm going to save by managing my electricity bill in my house better, then you're at net zero, and then you're no better off. I think the point is to make the point is that the data centers have really stepped up in terms of you're getting a net gain, not a net neutral.
Absolutely. And that's just the point I was going to go on to, Michelle, is that the latest numbers from the International Energy Association, have demonstrated that over the last 10 years, with the decommissioning of all the obsolete on-premise data centers and all that type of stuff into these efficient centers, it's about 1%. Electricity, 2010 went to ICT, now it's about the same. But what's more compelling is actually the carbon footprint associated with all of that right now is around 1.375% of global emissions. So essentially, if we were to have that or double it, right, we're still less than 1%, okay? Less than 1%. To Joan's point, you take a Nest thermostat, which I just looked at the numbers here, is that the Nest thermostat over the last, which is run by data in a center, they reckon over the last 8 years has saved 50 billion kilowatts of electricity with the data in the center, which is equivalent to planting 20 million acres of trees. Okay? So we need to get that context put in place about the data is the catalyst. We all have, society has to do so much. We're on iteration 1.0, let's say. We're in kindergarten of where we need to be in 2050. But this insistent on the one aspect of it. And then we throw in, and Joan, you know this as well, in 10 years, more than likely, we'll be using light to save data, not electricity at all. So we're only looking at things through the filter of now, that everything's going to stay the same. So what I'd love is people to come up to me and say, that thermostat that I have in my house, I realized that actually is equivalent to planting 25 trees. Because the data sits in Morris's Centre, which is being efficiently run by Mark's, what is it you do again, Mark?
Me, myself, or?
It's all up for question.
I think...
A completely existential question.
Yeah. One of the things that I would say, though, and this is, it's to your point, Gary, is how do we make that more visual? So Joan talked about the renewable energy and all the different sources of energy that we have at the moment. As end users, as procurers of energy, we've never had so many options of where we can source it from. None of that happens unless you've got a digitalized system, a transformation around how this all works with data that's making intelligent decisions behind it. And that significant step up that we're going to see around renewable usage and consumption and everything else like that, somehow we've got to turn that into a picture that the average Joe Bloggs walking down the street can look at and say, oh, I get that now. Because I think that's one of our biggest challenges as an industry, that there's still too much. I know you said cloud then, but that's probably the wrong description to use in this context.
Mark, to your exact point is that if you are trying to sell your industry to staff, you don't take loads of pictures of servers and racks and PDUs, right? In the same way as if you're trying to communicate the benefits of what you do, don't talk about PUE and water usage metrics. Talk about Netflix, Revolut, contactless cards, and all the things that people identify. Alexa, I did it, sorry. I was afraid to say Alexa because she kicks off here. But that's
Sorry, I don't know that one.
This is happening in homes all around the country now as well, Gary.
You're absolutely right.
Everyone has listened in. Their Alexa's activated.
That's the language, Mark, right? That's the language, is that, Alexa is a data suite that sits in a center that keeps and turns my lights off automatically here at 11 o'clock so it doesn't burn electricity all night. So that's the language. And I think the more comfortable we are in that, and that it's going to be around. And I think that's because this industry has been sort of covert for a long time. Why? Because your clients have asked you to be covert, because it's data, it's sensitive, but now as we go to B2C, now that TikTok and everything is taking over the world, there's another one, TikTok. That's a data in his data center. Or to Joan's point, when we were on that other thing we did a couple of weeks ago, Joan, do you remember that week? David Attenborough.
Oh, yes, on our Saturday.
Had just announced that he is going to join Instagram to try and help save the planet. So what actually he said was, I'm joining a data center. Because that's...
I think that's the thing that, you know, the genie is out of the bottle, and people don't sit around thinking a huge amount, well, not up until recently, about where their electricity came from or how anything works or where their water came from. Water just falls from the sky, and somebody makes electricity in a power plant somewhere, and it just happens. We turn on light switches. We never really thought too much about where any of that stuff came from, because that wasn't how it was sold to us. And we don't think too much about where our data comes from. We're a little bit more engaged with it because we feel it's our data, and somebody told us to be careful about our privacy, and we're going, what? You know, where we realized that we were part of the production of what it is we were consuming.
Well, probably everything is in play, isn't it? Beef
whereas
and everything.
We probably didn't feel that way about maybe our electricity or our water, but we don't think too much about it. It is a utility. And in the same way, and so people are probably a little bit removed from it, and we can't take away their apps now. They're not going to be satisfied with that. That's not going to be good enough, and it doesn't actually support the planet and the population that we've got. Like, the genie is also about out of the bottle in terms of population growth. We need to produce a lot to feed, clothe, heat, and house all of these people on this planet. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is through data. So it's through digital, through technology. It's not going to happen otherwise. It's not possible otherwise. So we need to be able to make sure that we can deliver all of that through technology, but the technology has to be part of the solution in itself as well. It can't be costing us more to solve the problem, and the problem costs itself.
And the other thing, it's relevant, I think, in measuring the industry's success in achieving its goals. The governance around, you know, the reporting, how you build trust and responsibility around the data that you're getting back from your own company and industry, and how you're reporting that back out. That's got to be third-party verified. It's got to be, everyone's got to be very comfortable with what you're producing, and that's where we all talk about it here. Is, you know, there's great 60% reduction in carbon footprint and 95% renewable energy, and what does that mean?
Yeah,
really, what does that mean? Does that really have an impact, or does it have an impact on paper? And I think that'll scratch at the surface and start really getting into the detail of what actually has an impact.
And it's very hard for an industry that is cloaked in jargon and technical terms to be really transparent, because we can come out with these, you know, messages and, you know, about even carbon neutral and carbon negative and carbon positive and net zero and, you know, PUE and sustainability. And what do they actually mean to people? What do we understand by them? You know, the people who aren't in the industry. I think we need to be much, I say we, I mean you guys, need to be.
People in the industry don't know either, Michelle.
Well, there's an element of that, but I think there's a need to be transparent, but there is a difficulty in explaining.
Well, I think, but that's a challenge that every industry has ever had in relation to regulation. Okay, so, and I think one of the things that we were just saying there is that we can use the technology via third party to authenticate through track and trace and verify and regulate the claims that are being made. But I think one of the things that it also allows us to do is deal with nuance. And these are complex problems. You know, one size does not fit all in terms of solutions. I watched a brilliant documentary there a while ago called Kiss the Ground, and it talked about soil. And as I said, trees have been the great old show-offs for the last couple of years. I didn't realize the answer was actually in the soil, not the trees. That they're kind of like the unsung hero underfoot is the soil. But the documentary focuses predominantly on farming practice in the US, which is very different to farming practice in Ireland. And actually grazing cattle and cows, and I'm a farmer's daughter and I understand the difference between those two things, grazing cattle and cows are fundamentally important to the quality of our soil. What is not good is when you're eating beef that is reared in feed stations in America where they are not grazing, they are literally at feeding slots where their food is poured into them and the soil is completely depleted. So the answer in one country is not necessarily the answer in another country. So again, we can do traceability, authentication of sustainable food production in Ireland is going to look different in terms of practice than it looks in other countries. And so again, that's technology being part of the solution, but giving us the capacity to deal with those nuances, those shades of grey, and that one size does not fit all, because their climate is different to ours and vice versa. Their soil type is different. Their practices are different.
Thanks, Joan. One thing, actually, just moving a little bit kind of on that stream of farming and into smart cities. Mark, what are you seeing there in terms of, I know we've touched on the Nest a little bit and how that has changed our lives, and how, you know, that in itself is, that one device in particular is changing how we consume energy. Is there anything else in particular out in the smart cities that we're seeing that's going to be transformational in how we consume energy and data?
So I think if you look at, and again, go back to right at the very start of the conversation when we were talking about industry, commercial, maybe home, and breaking it out that way, then there's major advances in technology. And some of them are advances, some of them are technologies that have existed for a long time and just haven't been adopted or have been slow on the uptake. Industry 4.0, or, you know, to Gary's point earlier on before around industry, that's a fascinating one, because more and more we're going to see more automation in that space, and that's going to be driven by data, by artificial intelligence. You could argue by robotics. Buildings are certainly becoming more and more intelligent, and it's interesting. Sustainability drops into so many different pockets. Largely, we're talking about energy as a sustainable conversation at the moment. But when you start to drop it into the building and how you interact with the building piece, then it starts to bring in so many different parts of sustainability. So people come into it, and how people interact with the building, how comfortable they are within that space. So from a lighting perspective, from I'm going to pick on one of Joan's points earlier on, that we are a community now of instant gratification. You know, if we have to wait for anything, then it becomes a problem, and you know, we're not a patient race anymore. And that automation in terms of how you engage with the building, work with the building, work in your home. If your Wi-Fi drops, you know, certainly for my 4-year-old daughter now, the world ends. God knows with an 11-year-old Gary, it must be awful, you know.
Time to get her to say please and thank you to Alexa. That's where we're at the moment.
Yes. So I think absolutely there's lots of technology that's coming forward. One of the interesting things I see is when we start to look at electric vehicles. And when we start relating this to our home life, so you've probably seen the announcements in the UK today around the ambition that the UK are putting forward for no petrol and diesel cars by 2030, or no new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. So this starts to change your whole home life significantly. Your home automation of a building has to change to be able to enable this to happen. Your consumer unit, which is probably at the moment a set of breakers that you flick on and off every now and again when the lights go off, doesn't become a consumer unit anymore. It becomes an intelligent home automation device that helps to manage power through the building, but it also starts to make intelligent decisions for you. And I think that's where you're going to see some significant change within our day-to-day home life. And then that starts to hopefully go back to the previous conversation, where it makes it so much more relatable for everyone. I'm not a technical person. If I can relate something to my day-to-day life, then I can visualize it and I can see how I interact with it. I think that will really help that conversation significantly.
So if you go forward 10 years, and we look at we set ourselves some targets, ambitious targets around our renewable energy usage in Ireland, and the split between renewable and fossil to 70-30. And we look at what will the data center in that period look like, even though we're building stuff now that will last that length of time. But if you're building something new in 10 years' time, what should it be, and what should it look like, and how should it be ingrained into a much more holistic community planning around where you put your facility, and how does it plumb into the environment that it's going into, and how does it use to the benefit of the environment, the utilities and the water, and how smart you make it. That's, and how, what sort of energy does it need to use to give the customers the type of energy or the SLA they need to keep their equipment running. What is that going to look like? And I think that's where we're headed. I think that's where it's going to end up. It's going to be a much more integrated conversation between the community, the utility, supply. Everyone's going to be involved in the conversation. You want to build something that's going to need 200, 60, 100 megawatts, whatever it is going to be, then it's got to be thought out in a much more holistic way than I think it has been in the past.
I think that's a great point, and one actually that I've been thinking about for a while. When I was making some notes, and I was thinking about this there a couple of weeks ago, I don't know why, but I was looking at land usage and marginal land, and I was just jotting here, okay, let's diversify marginal land from farming, small unsustainable farms size, into forestry. No, we don't want forests. Forests are bad. Citrus spruce is bad. Okay, we won't put a forest there. We put a wind farm there. Jesus, no, I don't want one of those either. Okay, we won't put a wind farm there. We'll put a data center there. Jesus, no, one of those big ugly things. Like, seriously, we've got to use the land for something. We've got to put these things somewhere. And we can't all say, no, not here.
Yeah.
And there is a global picture on that. And that's for sure. We need planets B, C, and D to make enough food, to have enough forests as well, to do all these things. But we are on an island. So it is a finite size, unless you're the Dutch and we're going to start dredging some of it out of the sea, although we could do wind farms out of the sea. But fundamentally, we are an island. We have marginal land. We have got to make choices, and we have to start planning for those choices, not based on what planning permission comes in this week or next month or next year, but holistically as an island, what are we using these square miles for, or these acres for, or these hectares for? What percentage is going to be forest? And I don't think forest is all the answer now that I read up more about the soil thing. So how much is forest? How much is food production? And in food production, you always have to do a certain amount of stock rotation and leaving fields fallow for a year or whatever, all of that. So what is farming, food production? What is sustainable energy? what is carbon storage, what is data centers, and make the grand plan. And then when you get to that grand plan, to Mark's point on towns and cities and how they're organized and how we live in this world where there's a plan, where we can look at things like microgrids, where communities can come together, where we have prosumers and we say, right, okay, this stuff is main grid, this stuff is microgrid. This is me, this is me for my neighbors, me for my road. And actually architect that vision that gives us the food production, the asset production that we need to have a decent, GDP, and have our exports and all of those kind of things that we need to sustain ourselves as an economy, but also as a society and also as a physical space.
Yeah.
Too much pontificating. I'm going to stop myself now.
John,
I think that's like.
John, have you been to Vegas?
President.
Have you been to Vegas, John?
No, I'd rather stick needles in my eyeballs than go to Vegas. I've no interest.
You fly into Las Vegas at night. It's the most amazing thing. And it's actually just a square box that appears in the horizon. It's perfect. It stops at an edge, a corner. And all the lines are all straight that way. And all the lines are straight that way. Why? Because they started from scratch 60 years ago. Yeah? It's an awful lot easier when you don't have legacy. What you're talking about there is the guys that were shoeing horses in New York weren't going out and promoting Model Ts in the 1910s and 20s. So it's all bringing people along with a language they understand. The one thing you've said there, which has the most excitement, is a thing called a prosumer. Can I make a few quid on this? Oh, so I put more panels on my roof and I can sell it and I can, when I park my electric car at night, if the grid needs, I can sell it back in. And I was reading the newspapers recently, and with all this going on, that was the thing that was getting most people's interest. Oh, I can put my whole roof as a solar. So it has to be a bit of stick and it has to be a bit of sugar. But this prosumer thing is very interesting. But getting back to Mark.
It is good. But Gary, just on that, like prosumer again means something to some people, but it's not going to mean much to my dad, and he's a farmer. I'm not going to get biased about this, but there's a load of people that are going to say, actually, this is going to solve other problems that we have. We have succession issue. I remember when I worked in BDO and I was family business services, and the guys asked me about succession planning, and I said, look, I'm a farmer's daughter. We invented fighting over the money. There is a challenge in farming in Ireland. There's a challenge in succession planning. And actually, this is going to solve some problems for people. There are farms in this country on marginal land that need a better solution than find a relative somewhere. There has to be a better solution than that. And there definitely has to be a better solution than fighting over it. So actually giving people a better long-term option on their land, and it may not be for forestry for all of them, but it might be for wind farms, or it might be for a data center, but it's looking at the whole.
But let's look at for a second. Let's assume we have a magic wand, right? And let's assume that we've just arrived in Ireland. And let's assume that what we know is that Ireland right now has more renewable energy capacity by a time of 15 times than this little island with 4 million people can consume. Okay, that's the numbers. Now let's assume that was gold or diamonds or platinum or something else that we tangibly feel and touch. We'd be digging every single mountain. We'd be burying into the sea and we'd be selling it, right? So then I go back to renewable energy and I say, we have 15 times more than we can ever consume. What should we do with it? Should we do nothing? Should we harvest it and export it to Europe for nothing? Or should we turn that into a raw material, into the most valuable asset on the planet right now, data, and export it with all the dividends? And if we arrive at that third place, then let's have the discussion.
I'm going to slightly counteract that argument a little bit, Gary, and say there's a fourth option that we look at energy storage, because you've got huge potential there, and this is where we start to make the world a much more sustainable place. So access to energy in areas where they don't have access to energy at the moment. This is a much bigger picture play, that if we can get energy storage right, then you've got, it's a tangible asset that you can export and really make something off there as well. So there's other options too.
That's no question. And you obviously have green hydrogen, and you have all other different types. But the point is, we have this natural renewable resource.
Yeah. That, no doubt.
I think my mind went to where Mark's was as well, in terms of the energy storage, rather than, we can have all the energy and use it ourselves around data centers and the data piece that you're talking about, or we can actually look at it as most energy oil producing countries do. They just take the raw and they store it and they sell it. And we need to, the technology is there for the storage, or it's coming for the storage.
Anything you sell at wholesale, you sell at pennies. Anything you sell at the raw material, the raw product and export. To me, that's like exporting all the diamonds to Antwerp and letting the guy that makes the jewellery make all the money.
Lawrence, can I ask you a question just on one of the points earlier? You talked about almost the localization of data, and when you've got multiple homes that have become these data hubs as well and are generating so much information. Did you see the future of data centers being smaller, more localized? This edge conversation that we hear a lot about at the moment, or because the trend at the moment is to build bigger?
Yeah. Well, I see it as part of the future, definitely. Yeah, it's going to be something that we will have to tackle, and that can be done in a very sustained way if you think about it, because these particular facilities don't have to be that big. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily have to be manned, they can be sourced from 100% renewable energy, in my view, and some of the prototypes that I've seen, can work very nicely. So I do see that as part of the digital infrastructure of the future. I suppose you still need the back to the compute center, back to where the data gets crunched and people get access to that to analyze it. So yes is the answer. And the other thing on the location, I think, is very important, because sometimes it gets lost in the conversation, because we're talking about sustainability and energy. The reasons why we have clusters of facilities all in and around the one place is because they breed off each other, and success breeds success, and that's, it doesn't matter what country you go to, that is the case in every single country. So we need to understand the benefits of going somewhere else to access some resource that then cuts off the umbilical cord to the reason why we were successful in the first place. Yeah. So there's a balance, and the reason why I said more holistic thinking, we need to, I don't think our industry in Ireland is here to stay for a long time. We have so much infrastructure here now of such a high level that it's going to form part of the, in my view, certainly one of the pillars for the digitization in the big wider European plan as well. But it's just making sure that we are able to continue to support it in a sustainable way, and that's an easy conversation to get all the stakeholders properly around the table.
It's also often forgotten, and shouldn't be. And I go back and more a lot of the people on the panel, but there's data in the centres, and that's part of the ICT and related services that is Ireland's largest export, bar none, right now.
Yeah,
120 billion of ICT and related services. So, I often am asked by people, what use are these things anyway? What use are they anyway? Even outside of the Netflix and the thing, they're actually a part. And if you smile when I tell this story, you're way older than I thought. Back in the day when Microsoft came here, they used to make floppy disks. And they used to localize it into every language imaginable, called localization. And they used to take that floppy disk and put it into a box and put thousands of them into 40-foot containers and ship them to Duisburg, right? The warehouse for the software was beside the people. And as the cloud has developed, we've now separated the warehouse from the people. But it's effectively the warehouse for Microsoft's data. And the 6,500 people now are somewhere else. But just go back 20 years when the floppy disk was put in place. So you cannot not separate the people that work on the data and the people that work in the data. And effectively, that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is to monetize it. But the CSO have recently come out. And that electron, that's a green electron that goes into this center that makes data, that gets exported on Spotify, gets monetized, 120 billion. And if we pull the plug on that and pull the plug on pharmaceutical, where we are right now, we'd have a really difficult balance of trade. So it is actually a very valuable asset to have in a country when everything else, particularly at the moment, when everything else is pretty much curtailed. Often forgotten, Michelle. Oh, Michelle, you're still there.
I just nodded off there for a minute. You don't need me. That's for sure. But actually, do you know what? We are heading up to the top of the hour. We've got a question in there, but I think, Maris, you actually dealt with quite a bit of this question. So there's only one piece that I'm going to read out and see if anybody wants to grasp this. So how can we look at creating a circular economy between data, the environment, and farming and the sea? So this relates back, Joan, to your point in particular in the land use. We can manage it. He also talks about how, about these clusters and about spreading it around the country, and how Gary thinks that the centres have to be Dublin-centric, which Maris already touched on. But we can manage this, but data is just one part of the equation. So it's really, I think the question there is really around circular economy, data, the environment, farming, and the sea. Anybody want to tackle that? And you have about 2 minutes.
Well, I wouldn't mind just talking about circular economy, actually.
Yeah.
Because it has to be the answer. Like, I mean, that whole circular economy, the more you understand that we literally do not have enough planets to make enough food, to store enough carbon, to populate enough people, we get a whole lot more efficient about using the one that we're on. And that means sending things around in that circle and recycling and repurposing more and more, and eliminating waste out of the system. So one of the things that I said at the very start of this was, how we help our customers to, when we talk about sustainability, it's not just about reducing their energy consumption or having greener artifacts. At the end of it, it's about reducing all waste. And that means getting better at predicting what we need and having better behaviors in terms of how we as consumers, how we purchase, but also giving us the information that we need to make more informed choices. So that whole idea of a circular economy in the economy sense, in terms of how we're transacting things. But I think the person who asked that question put another layer on that, which is the physical part that sits underneath the transactions, which is where we're using land, where we're using water. So farming and the marine and the technology and the energy, they're all coming from this same physical thing. They're all coming from the earth and the water and the air. So we have to make choices about, well, if we can draw this from the air or the sunlight, we don't need to draw it from the earth. And if we can draw it from there and store it there, and we can store it in that carbon there, and we can store energy here, then we're eliminating waste in that system too. So the circular economy, part of it is the transactional piece, but the other part, I think, is the land use piece. And it's really interesting to put those two layers, one on top of the other. My personal, if I was to get really, really what I would love to see is, and this is to Gary's point constantly, and even I suppose what Mark was saying, because Mark, I'm not a techie either in that sense, and I need it to be relatable to me. I know how to recycle. But what I'm not clear, because it says on the label, this is recyclable. And I can buy a product that says on the outside, it says packaging is widely recycled. But what I don't know is how to shop as a consumer based on carbon footprint. And the shopping experience that we all have does not allow us to do that too well. There is a brilliant shop here in Mullingar where it's the refill mill, and you can go in and you bring your own jars and you just buy everything, no packaging, you just reuse what you've got, and it's brilliant. But I have to go to a specialist place to do that, and it sells certain products. What I need to be able to do is run up the road to my favorite German supermarket and actually shop an aisle that says everything you shop here, sustainable, carbon footprint of this size, carbon footprint of this size.
Like
Let me shop the aisles. And actually, when we get to circular economy then, and this is what I really want in tax policy, where it really starts turning for people and incentives, is that instead of hitting me constantly with a carbon tax, give me a credit for making better choices. So I can give you a receipt at the end of the year for all of my shopping in my favorite retailer and say, my receipts say that 70% of my shop had a green carbon footprint and 10% was red. It was in the naughty list. But if I can get it to a certain amount, gamification, nothing like it to get people incentivized. If I can get it within certain parameters, I get a tax credit. Now that changes behaviors. And it changes behaviors from the consumer, but it changes behaviors from the manufacturers, from the retailers, and that whole circular bit goes on. And I get another credit then for every time I send out a green bin, a blue bin, a recyclable bin versus a main waste bin. And we've got the records for that. My waste disposal company knows how many bins I put out a year and what color they are. So let's start incentivizing people in that circular economy piece, using the data, and put that all in that overlayer bit on the physical use of land too, including landfill.
I'm going to take that as your closing words.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me speak anymore either.
Oh no, it was brilliant, Joan. Thank you. And I go to just if Gary, Mark, and Maris just were right up now, and we've got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to just have some closing thoughts or closing words after that very active discussion.
So maybe I'll start, Michelle. But my Schneider Electric CEO Jean-Pascal Tricoire, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I'll never say it as well as he does. But he uses the phrase that sustainability is the challenge of a generation, and it's this generation now. Because if we don't act on it, if we don't do something about it, it's going to be too late. We're the only generation that can resolve the sustainability challenge, and it is around the how. The data is there to support it, to help to drive it. Every facet that we've talked about today will play a role within this challenge. I think the more we talk about it, the more we make it visible. We have to make it, as Joan quite rightly just said there, relatable and something that we feel we can own and touch ourselves. That it's not a big corporation ask, it's an individual contributor ask as well. Yeah. And I think I'll leave it at that, but it's a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you, Mark. Maris.
I'll just repeat myself. It's going to take a concerted effort from all the stakeholders if we're going to achieve these goals. So it's individuals, it's companies, it's policymakers, it's governments, it's state agencies, it's everybody. And we've got to take ownership and stand up and be counted.
Thanks, Maris. And Gary?
I think words matter a lot. Context matters a huge amount. Please read past the 140 characters on a Twitter. Look at the context. Read history. Look at the objections to the electrification of the planet, if you want to feel what it's like, to the resistance to the digitalization of the planet. And always remember, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed.
Thank you, Gary. That was fantastic. And Joan, do you want to add anything? Go on.
I really like that last bit about it's not evenly distributed. That's so
I read it somewhere, I made it up, or maybe I read it. Alexa.
No, Well, Alexa is getting no final words. Thank you, everybody. That was an absolutely brilliant discussion. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the engagement. You made my job very easy. I could just sit here and be quiet while y'all had a very engaged discussion. So thank you very much. Thanks to the audience. And thanks, Hugh, for having us all. So really appreciate it.
I would just like to say that was a fascinating discussion. It took me places I hadn't thought. I think some of the take-homeables that I've got is I think there is a huge amount of education needed to get people to understand what a data center is and how it plays into their life. I think the circular economy, it's got to be a must. Time is already passing and we probably need to get on that. And I just want to say thank you. You've widened my concepts and my thoughts. So I think it's a beautiful afternoon. Thank you on behalf of Data Centers Ireland. Thank you very much. This will be downloadable probably by the end of tomorrow on our website if you wish to go there. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.